Hi everyone, and you are welcome to this lecture, Loops in Python. In this lecture, we are going to learn about the second way that we can use in order to update the default behavior of program execution flow. So I will start by defining the loops, then we will learn about for loop, for else loop, while loop, and I will end up this lecture by a quick summary. So let's get started. In a previous lecture, we see that the program execution flow is from left to right, from top to the bottom. And this is the default behavior. But sometimes I need to update this behavior. And in order to do that, I can use conditional statements or loops. Loops are mainly used to repeat the execution of some statements several times without the need to write these statements multiple times. So this is a very important point about loops. So I can repeat same statement multiple times without the need to typing these statements again and again. In Python, there are two types of loop. We have for loop and while loop. Let's start by understanding what's for loop first. I will start by showing you the syntax. So as you see here, if you want to use for loop, you have to say for, then variable or set of variables. So you can say variable or variables in iterable, then colon, and then you have to put some statements. You can use one statement or multiple statements. And note here that there are some spaces at the beginning of each line of statements in order to make the interpreter understand that these statements belongs to the block of for. And please here don't forget the colon. The word iterable mean these objects respect the iteration protocol. In a following lecture, we will understand exactly what is the meaning of iterable. But for the sake of this lecture, you can understand that list is an iterable, set is an iterable, string is an iterable, dictionary is an iterable, and all the collections that we have learned before are iterable. Now I am sure that the question that rises in your mind right now, when I have to use for loop. So we use for loop when I already know the number of iterations that I want to repeat the statements, and in this case we will use for loop with range function. We want to iterate over uniterable items like list, dictionary. So I want to scan all of these items and process these items in some way. So I will use for loop. So when I know number of iteration or when I want to iterate over uniterable items. Sometimes we can use else with for. As you see here, I say for else, and here the same syntax of for. After else there is colon, and then we have one statement or multiple statements according to your program. And don't forget that else is optional. Now we have to ask ourselves, I say sometimes we could use else. So when I have to use else, the block of code inside else is gonna be executed after the final iteration. So if you want to execute some statements, once the for loop finishes the execution of all iteration, then you have to use else. So in other words, the block of codes within else is executed after the final iteration. Now let's move to PyCharm IDE in order to see some examples. The first example that I want to show you is the following. Assume I have the following list of fruits. So I have apple, banana, cherry, and I want to print each item inside this list. So I will say for item in fruits, then I will say print item. If I run this program, I will get apple, then banana, then cherry. And as you see here, I used for loop in order to iterate over each item of an iterable. In this case, the iterable is a list. Let's take another example. Let me assume that I have the following list which has ages of people, and I want to know if those people can be employed or not. By knowing that the condition is the age of the person should be above 20 years old in order to be employed. So I will say for A in ages, so for each A in ages, if A is bigger than 20, I will say print can be employed, else I will say cannot be employed. I will run. As you see, I got here cannot be employed, can be employed, can be employed, but it's not very clear. So let's use string format in this case. So I will put curly braces here and curly braces here, and I will use dot format function in order to print the value of age, and I will pass A in this case. So if I run, as you see here, 12 cannot be employed, 23 can be employed, 25 can be employed, 42 can be employed, 14 cannot be employed. Let's see one more example about for loop, and in this case I'm going to use now a string. So I assume I have the following string which is banana. So I will say for L in B print L and run. I will get BANENA. As you see in this simple example, when I loop over a string, in each iteration, I will take one item from this string, or one letter in this case. It will be assigned to L, and I'm going to print this inside this for loop. The last example that I want to show you about for is the following. Let me assume that I have the following dictionary, which is students' marks. If I want to loop over the items, let me say for key in student marks, print key, and then I will run. So as you see here, I got student 1, student 2, student 3. In this case, I loop over the items for 3 times. Why 3 times? Because this dictionary has 3 items. And look here, when I say for variable in dictionary, by default, I'm using the key in this case. So in the first iteration, I take student 1. In the second iteration, I took student 2, and so on. If you want to print both the key and the value, then you have to use index. So you can say the following: print the key is and the value is. So I'm using string formatting in this case, and I have to pass 2 values. The first one is key, the second one is student's marks key. If I run, as you see here, I got the key is student 1, which is the first value, and the value is 5, and that's it for the other items. So what we can see here, that we can use for in this way, we have to say for variable in iterable, and in this case, in each iteration, a value from this iterable will be assigned to this variable until we scan all the items inside the iterable. Now, before I move to while loop, I want to show you an example about for else. So let me assume that I have fruits equal to apple, banana, cherry. In our previous example, we do the following. We say for x in fruits, print x. If I run, as you see, x took apple at the first iteration, banana in the second iteration, then cherry. Now if I add this else here, I will have the following. I will have apple, banana, cherry, and then this statement will be printed, which is finally finished. So we can understand from this that the content of else, which is print statement in this case, is gonna be executed once all the iteration of for loop has been completed. And that's all for this for loop. Now let's talk about the second type of loops, which is while. First of all, let's see the syntax. If you want to use while, you have to say while, then you have to put condition, colon, and statement or block of statements. And don't forget the spaces here or indentation, and don't forget the colon here. The condition here could be any expression that returns true or false, like comparison operators, membership operators, identity operators, or a combination of these operators in order to make a more complex expression. How while loop works, it's very easy. While will check this condition. If it's true, it will execute these statements. Then it will get back to check the condition, and then if it's true, the statements will be executed, and while will keep doing that until the condition become false. So most often we update something within the loop body in order to make the condition false, and the execution continues after while. Now the question is, when we have to use while. We use while loop usually when we don't know the number of iterations, but we want to iterate as long as a condition is satisfied. So previously, I don't know how many times I want to iterate, but there is a condition. As long as this condition is satisfied, I will execute the loop body. Let's move now to PyCharm IDE to see some code examples about while. The first example that I want to show you is quite easy. I will assume that I have a variable I equal to 0, and I want to print the numbers from 0 to 9. So I will say while I smaller than 10, print I, and then I will say I equal to I plus 1. I run. As you see, I get the number 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 until 9. Now what happened here? When the interpreter reached this point, it find while I smaller than 10. I it's 0, yeah, it's smaller than 10. So the execution will continue from here. I will be printed, and the content of I will be updated to be 1 in this case, because the previous one is 0, and the new I now it's 1. Now we will get back to the condition again. It's still satisfied because now I is 1, it's smaller than 10. So I will print I, and I will update the value, and now it's 2, and I will keep doing that until I reach the value of 10. 10 is not smaller than 10 because 10 is equal to 10, so this condition is not satisfied, and the execution will continue after a while because there is no statement here, so the execution will stop. As you see here, we print only until 9. The second example that I want to show you will help you understand the idea better of while. First of all, I'm going to import random module, and then I will print this code. So first of all, I will define a variable I equal to 0, and here I am going to assume that I have a temperature sensor, and this sensor gives me the temperature value. So as long as the temperature value is lower than 60, I will print this statement: degree is in normal range. But once the temperature it's above this value, I will print temperature degree is out of normal range. So this is a realistic example about using of while loop, because if we are reading, for example, a sensor, we don't know when the temperature will become outside the normal range. But as long as it's in the correct range, I want to show there is nothing, but it's above normal range. For example, I will show error message, or I will fire an alarm, and so on. So I will say while I it's smaller than 10, so I will repeat this code for 10 times. During this, I will measure the temperature. I will assume here the temperature is just a random number in this range. I will say if temperature it's smaller than 60, I will print this, else I will print this. And don't forget, I have to put here I equal to I plus 1 to make sure that the loop will stop after 10 iterations. If I run, as you see here, I got 38 degree is in normal range, 87 degree is out of normal range. So the first one, temperature was 38, so this condition is satisfied and I got in normal range. 87, the condition is not satisfied, so I print this statement and so on. So we can see here that while loop mainly is used as long as a condition is satisfied. Now let's recap what we have learned in this lecture. First of all, we see that loops are mainly used to repeat the execution of some statements several times without the need to write these statements more than one time. We have two types of loop. The first one is for, and mainly we use for when we know the number of iterations or when we want to iterate over an iterable items. And don't forget that optionally we can use else with for if we need it. The second type of loops is while, and usually we use while when we don't know the number of iterations previously, but I want to iterate as long as a condition is satisfied, and this is known as condition based iteration. Please refer to the file Loops in Python Challenges, in which you will find some challenges to practice what you have learned in this lecture. Thank you very much for your time, and if you are available, join me in the next lecture.